Interesting. That's how I would describe it. Better, as I look back, better than I would have expected it to be. And I say interesting because I was fairly new, not fairly, I was new to Georgetown when I first came here and attended high school. I arrived in Georgetown about 2 to 3 weeks before school began in August of 1968. I was coming from one of the biggest cities in the world, New York City. I was young, I was green, I was naive, but I was loved. My parents, who were born and raised here in Georgetown, decided that they would tear down the old house and build the new house, which was a brick structure, and I actually still live there. But I had never lived in the South. And I was raised in the city, New York City, particularly Brooklyn, where I was not exposed to things culturally and politically and racially that I was exposed to when I moved here. So as you can imagine, me being a 15-year-old kid, culturally, the language was different, the nomenclature, almost everything. For instance, what I was calling growing up a soda, down here the language was a pop. A lollipop was a sucker. Just everything was different, and that's just so-called English. Then we had to deal with the Gullah, and I couldn't understand what they were saying because Gullah is a different language. And as you may or may not know, for many centuries it was completely ridiculed before they found out that it was actually a language that went and connected with West Africa. So that people who spoke Gullah would say things without helping verbs. Some of them still do. They would say, instead of saying, I was glad, they say, I glad you come, have a cup of tea, or something like that. And I'm like, huh? And one of my friends would say, give me 50 cents. I said, what? 50 cents. So it was different. And at that time, to be judgmentally honest, I ridiculed a lot of it. I just thought, well, they didn't. Now, mind you, my dad and mother grew up here, but they, to an extent, didn't speak as strongly Gullah language as some of the others. And you'll find that even today. In the city of Georgetown, African Americans speak a little more formally, but the further you go into the rural section is where you see that. And of course, there's a history behind it. My mother was the one that told me, I had no idea that school didn't exist but 4 months out of the year. And of course, the reason being is because South Carolina then, and maybe even perhaps now, is an agricultural state, and people had to work. When you were 11, 12, even 9 and 10, you were out there working, especially if you had to help your family, which is one of the reasons why African Americans had such large families. I'm a historian, so I was kind of amazed to find out certain people had 12 siblings, sometimes more. So that's just a culture, not just blacks, but whites too, because the more you had, the more fingers, arms, legs, whatever, to help with the farming. So Winyah was an experience culturally. I did not experience a lot of issues racially. They were there, but they were kind of, not clandestine, but subtle, okay? I'll give you an example. I remember, by the way, I have a brother 1 year older than I. We were the two youngest in terms of my family. My family had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and I was the youngest of all of them, but one of my sisters and one of my brothers and one of my other sisters was so much older, 5, 10, 11 years older. So when I and my brother came here in 1968, I think I was in the 10th grade, and my brother, who's 1 year older than I am, was in the 11th. And I remember being in the gym and taking PE, and one of the things that they did then, they might still do, is wrestle. I didn't know anything about wrestling. I didn't know anything about football. I mean, I knew it existed on TV, but where I was raised, everything was baseball. I found out quickly that baseball took not a second, but a third seat to football. So one day we were behind the church, right here at Bethel AME, a few blocks from here. And at that time, they didn't have a parking lot. They had a field, and they would do sandlot or, football, just a group of people. I had never really played football. So some of the guys with a reputation for being great football players, I call myself tackling them, and they literally dragged me the entire field, 50, 60 yards. Well, that wasn't any big deal to me because it was a game. I'm 15 or 16. When I got back to school, they were saying, man, they dragged Steve all the way to. Now I can hold my own in baseball, and I could hold my own in basketball. But, that wasn't any big deal to me. So let's go back to the wrestling at Winyah. I'm wrestling a guy, I'm black, he's white. I'm not thinking anything about it because I grew up in a multicultural, multiracial community. Didn't know anything about it. All of a sudden, the black students, well, classmates, I guess, cheering me on, and the white students doing just the opposite. Get him, sick him, So I just, I accepted that was the norm, but it was blown out of proportion. I can also tell you that I got my butt whipped, and I'm only being kind, I wouldn't say but I didn't care, you know what I mean? So it was one of those things. So culturally, to answer your question more succinctly, is that I had to get used to it. I hated it, I really did, because it was so different. Racially, I got used to it, Politically, I wasn't into politics. My parents were, particularly my dad. So it didn't mean that much to me. It went straight over my head. As well it should have at that age. There was one incident that happened a block from here, less than a block from here, the Strand Theater. We got here, again, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before school began. And I was accustomed to going to movies, but in my community, the movie, you had to do a little walking or take a bus. So when I found out that the Strand Theater was literally 4 blocks from where we were living, and it was summer, I didn't have a car, I didn't have a license, so we were home. At that time, people don't recall that all of these stations we have on TV now didn't exist back then. You had maybe 6 stations. So I said to my mother, said, Mommy, can we go to the movies, meaning my brother and I? And a funny thing happened. My mother was very strict, but didactic. She said what she meant and meant what she said. She didn't tap dance, she didn't hesitate, she was very plain spoken. I said, Mommy, can we go to the movies, my brother and I? And she hesitated for it seemed like an eternity. I know it was only a minute or two, but and then it was like E.F. Hutton, and then finally said, y'all go ahead. Well, I didn't find out until much later, her trepidation was that the Strand movie theater, and you have to keep in mind that she had been gone for many years. Like most African Americans, they left the South to find a better life going north, was just coming out of segregation. Now, I don't have to, well, maybe I do have to tell you, segregation was outlawed in 1954, but that was just the law. That doesn't mean in practice it existed. So in 1968, 14 years later, the vestiges of segregation was still in play. But at the Strand Theater, it was okay because my mother didn't want to say that when you go to the movies, y'all go sit up in the balcony. And there may be some issues. Well, there weren't any issues. I don't even remember the movies. I think I did. The movie was called MASH, the same television show. It bored the bejesus out of me because I'm not into any military stuff. But it got me out the house, and it was someplace we can go alone because it was walking distance. But I just remember I'm not going to say trepidation, but the resistance on my mother's face, because she wanted her boys to feel that they were acclimated the way we were in the North. It wasn't an issue. Never had to hesitate when we said we wanted to go somewhere. So again, it was a culture shock. It was a racial, not shock, but uncomfortableness. And there was a lot of things that was just new to me. And I got to be Judgment Day honest. I did not like it. I begged. I knew we weren't going back because the house was just built, but I was uncomfortable. And then something unusual happened about a year later. My mother, who was only 55, passed away. So go figure. The way I am now, the way you know me, and the way everyone else knows me here, Steve the speaker, Steve the historian, just the opposite. I was shy. I was very shy. And when my mother passed, I became more shy, if that's a word. I just didn't want to deal with anything. Remember, I'm the youngest, and longevity runs in my family. I had no idea that, she was going to leave us. So it did affect me. And I remember around springtime was the prom. I didn't want to leave the house. Again, I didn't have a license, really wasn't at that time social. I was starting to look at girls, but I wasn't there yet, So I was comfortable just going to school and going home. Well, my brother was just the opposite. He was extroverted and very social. He was on the basketball team at Winyah. We didn't have many blacks on the team. I think we had about 5 or 6. And we'll get into that later, the rivalry between Howard and Winyah. Now, prom time comes, and he was going because I think he was in the 12th grade. I might have been in the 11th grade. I didn't want to go. And I had everyone in my family, my cousins, my dad, begging me, you should go, you should go. I said, no, I'm okay. They thought I was still grieving over my mother, which I probably was, but the other thing was I didn't care. Didn't have a girlfriend, didn't even want a girlfriend. So they finally convinced me to go, and I went, and I had a good time. And then later I became a little less, came out of my shell. I remember the song I will never forget this song, by the Temptations. It was just my imagination running away with me. And so I started going to some of the clubs, local clubs that we can go to, dancing and singing and enjoying the company of the opposite sex. And gradually I got over thinking about the loss of my mother. Yeah. Well, I was a budding Willie Mays. I don't know if you know who Willie Mays was. He's actually still living. But I wanted anybody who knew me from the time I was 6 years old. I was always playing baseball, softball, stickball, mostly up there. And so when I came here, it was about baseball. I was literally on the baseball team, the darkest thing on the team, let me put it like that. But I had skills. I could run, I could throw, I could hit, I could do it all. And I was on the track team. I wasn't the fastest, but I made the team. I don't know if you want me to get into it, but there was a very negative, painful experience that I had on the team. I wouldn't call it racial, although it had racial overtones. But that was what I was doing for extracurricular activity. I loved it. I dreamed I would literally go to study hall, you know what study hall is, and look at the box scores. My team was the San Francisco Giants because Willie Mays was a Giant when he played in New York. And then in the late 60s, they moved to San Francisco. So back then, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have a lot. They're 3 hours behind. So I would have to go to bed at night, and I wouldn't know the score of the game until the next morning. So I'm looking at the box scores, and I was, yes, Willie Mays hit a home run, Willie McCovey. And the Giants won. Big rivalry between the Giants and the Dodgers. Being from Brooklyn, I was one of the few Giant fans. Everybody else in the black community was a Dodger fan. You know why? Jackie Robinson. The first black to come up, you remember I'm a historian, came up with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So here we are, 20 years later, everybody's Brooklyn Dodgers. I still like the Dodgers, but I was a Giant fan. So it was about, in the study hall, just looking at baseball. I got my lesson. I was a very good student, had excellent grades, which helped me get into college. But that was my extracurricular activity. I literally lived and breathed baseball. It was interesting. It was different. You have to remember, I had never gone to high school because I was in junior high school when we moved here, and even then I was sort of shy. Let me digress a little bit. Can I digress a little bit? I had a young girl that I was sweet on in Brooklyn, and it had to be the 8th grade. Her name was Virginia, and I was looking at her every day, but I was just too shy. I wasn't the most attractive person back then either. Somebody said, "You're still not, Steve," but it's okay. It's all right. That's why I should smile. We all look better when we smile. And I know she kind of liked me too, but I just couldn't get up the nerve to say anything. So I waited to the absolute last year because I knew I was leaving. And at the last day of school, I said, "Virginia, could I see you after school?" And she said, "Sure, Steve." So I went there, and we went across the street from the school, and I don't know exactly what I said, but I ended up by saying, "Virginia, would you go with me?" And she looked at me and said, "Go with you where, Steve?" And I didn't want to say, "Be my girlfriend." I must have got it out. I don't remember what she said. It wasn't, I don't know, but I left. And I didn't see her for 30 or 40 years later. And I was in church. By that time, she had gotten married, and she had at least 6 kids. She was still fine as wine, though. Anyway, let's get back to Georgetown. I'm at Winyah, and they had something called pep rallies. I didn't know what a pep rally was, but I enjoyed that. Of course, it was for the football team. Well, they had for the basketball team. So I enjoyed that. And they had other little things going on. And it was fun. It was exciting. I was age appropriately enjoying it. Yes. Wow! All of that. Children's stuff. It was fun. We had a few black cheerleaders, at least 2 or 3, and I enjoyed it. I don't know. It's just what you would expect a pep rally to be. And what else did I enjoy? I forget what it's called. But they had extracurricular activities, and it's one of the things I did enjoy, going to see the basketball games. And I tolerated the football, even though I wasn't into football, but a lot of my classmates were. So it was a very exciting time to be in high school. Now, I don't know if you want to get into this, but the rivalry, oh God, the rivalry between Howard and Georgetown. Now, when I first got to Winyah, again, which is 1968, there were only 17 blacks that went there. Of which my brother and I were 2. So we all knew each other. But all of a sudden, the sports teams were integrated, especially basketball. So my brother, my friend Larkin Campbell, and Blue Moon Odom, I think is his name, and several other, Rudolph Radley, who used to be a city councilman here. They were all on the basketball team. Now, I wasn't good enough for a basketball team, but because the coach, a fellow by the name of, I think, Nate Allen, who was the coach, and he was also my math teacher, and I liked him, and he liked me. He said, well, Steve, you can be the statistician. Well, I couldn't even spell statistician, but I would take down the rebounds, you know. And then they accused me of padding the books because my brother was on the team, and he had the most rebounds. Well, he did. So it is what it is. But because there were several blacks on the team, and Howard being an all-blacks legendary school, the rivalry started brewing. And everybody was at those games. Well, they played 2 times out of the year, at least. And I can tell you that Howard won each time. But a funny thing happened. I remember one of the players, I won't nominate him now because he passed away a few years ago, one of the black players. He literally went into the locker room after the game. He was so distraught. He took a shower with his uniform on. That's how upset he was. Now, I'm talking about stuff 50 years ago. Again, I'm not going to call his name, but there's stuff you don't forget, you know. And it was close. It was a close game. But, I mean, you know, somebody had to win, somebody had to lose. But now, we didn't have that in baseball, you know. But that was a big thing. I enjoyed my time and tenure at Winyah. I was on the journalism club, a few club, writers club. Even then, I liked to write. And there was a teacher there by the name of Miss Peterson. I remember when Winyah integrated her. Let me just say this. For the first year that I was there, probably a 9th grader, the school was not integrated. Integration had just begun. So my 2nd and 3rd year, it was integrated. And it was interesting because more and more people from Howard started coming. And you know how, I don't know if you know this, but somehow they had fashioned it that if you were college bound, go to Winyah. If you were vocationally bound, trade, stay at Howard. Well, a lot of people came to Winyah. I'm still friends with a lot of them. And so it was nice, especially with more girls, okay? I'm just being honest. So some of the teachers, and I got along well with the teachers with the exception of one. Again, I'm not gonna nominate her, but there was no love lost between us. So, but my grades were really good. And my dad saw to that. And so when it integrated, you know, there were a lot more activities I could enjoy, even though I had just lost my mother. I graduated 1 year early. And the reason I did that is because, again, I had lost my mother, and my brother and I, we were so close in age, we were raised doing everything together. And so my dad didn't want my brother to go off and leave me here 1 year alone by myself, which I guess would have been okay with me. So what they did, he went to Miss Miss Black, and who was the guidance counselor, one of the nicest people you could have ever met. I don't know if she's still living, but I loved the ground she walked on. Harvey Rice was the principal, but Miss Black was the one that you can go to. And that dad said, well, Stevie, they call me Stevie, we would like to know how many credits he have, what they call Carnegie units. You need 24. I think I had 18, and I only needed 6 credits, 3 in English, and I don't even know what the other was for. So the agreement was, well, we'll let him take part in the graduation ceremony, but cap and gown and all of that. But in order to get his diploma, he's got to finish. So I went to night school in New York. It's like a hot knife going through butter. And then I sent my credit, got the credit. I remember I had to take a course in Shakespeare. Oh God, one of his, I forget the name of his plays, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand it. I got on the train and I went down to 14th Street and saw the movie, and the light bulb went on, and I passed the test. Anyway, this is night school. Macbeth, that's it. So I got the credit and I got the diploma, and later on, that same diploma from Winyah helped me get a scholarship to one of my schools. I want to say this. My dad, God rest his soul, my dad, we lived 4 blocks from Winyah. He knew about the coming integration. He advocated for it. He was, and people know him to this day as Mr. NAACP because he was the president of the NAACP. I'm not sure if he was during that year, but he was always involved. He was in the March on Washington. I literally shook the hand of Jackie Robinson. My dad was just that kind of a person. So when we came here in July of 1968, didn't say anything to me or my brother. We knew we were going to some school. We didn't know which one. But my dad took us by the hand, literally, and walked us 4 blocks. We went up the steps of Winyah. My dad went in there, spoke to Miss Black, who was of the other persuasion, even though her name was Black, but very nice, very nice. And my dad didn't ask. He said, "These are my boys." I'm telling you verbatim what he said. "These are my boys. Say hello, Steve. Say hello, Dwayne. And they're going to go to school right here." That's exactly how he said it. And Miss Black said, "Sure, Reverend Williams, no problem." And that was that, okay? Now I say that because a lot of blacks did not want to go to Winyah. See, when you're raised under segregation, you're raised with a certain degree of prejudice. And on both sides, and you're just uneasy. I remember something my mother said. My mother was extremely religiously conservative, Pentecostal, holiness. They didn't believe in makeup, earrings, none of that. Women didn't wear pants, I'm telling you this. My mother said something which was out of character to her. We were going to school. It may have been the first day, the second day, I don't know. My mother said, "You all stick together. If anything happened to one, you better be there for the other." That's exactly what she said. She said, "Don't go looking for anything. But if something go down, you better stick together." Never will forget it. I got to be Judgment Day on it. It didn't. I had left my high school days behind me. I probably was in college somewhere. You know, when you leave, see, I'm going to say something, and I shouldn't say it publicly, but I will. When you are not born and raised here, there's a certain degree of being considered an outsider, regardless of your race. For many years, I have felt like an outsider. But I've learned to accept it. Was it Rudyard Kipling said, "All others are losing their head and blaming it on you, but make allowances." I made allowances for people. Now, they accept me partially because of my parents. It's part of the African culture, the Gullah culture. If you go to some of these sea islands and remote places, the first thing they're going to ask you is, who are your people? Who are your people? Who are you? And you can say, "Look, I have papers that we've had this property in the family for 100 years. They don't want to hear that. They just want to know, are you related to them? Either you are, or as they say, either you is or either you ain't." All right? So it's similar to those who, African Americans on the mainland. If your father, your mother, your family is here, family is very big in our community, then you are accepted. Well, my parents were raised here, grandparents, all of that, but I and my brother, we weren't. So a part of me, somebody would say, "These are your cousins." Well, that and a nickel will get you on the subway. I wasn't raised with you, I just met you. Because you're my cousin doesn't mean we're the closest. You know, a lot of families cousin, but we ain't close. So even today, I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
I was asking about the fire, how that struck.
Okay, the fire didn't bother me because I had left Georgetown. And it's only after 40 or 50 years that I came back, because when I left Georgetown, I was not coming back. There was a song, it wasn't a popular song, but I'll never forget it. I don't even know the artist, but the song was on the radio. Well, it's a westbound number 9. Gonna leave this county far behind. I'm gonna leave while I got my peace of mind. I kept saying I ain't never coming back to Georgetown. Even school, my father had to beg me to go back to school. My first college was Johnson C. Smith in Charlotte. And he said, Steve, I want you to go back to school. I said, Daddy, I just got out of school. Man, I had a job. I was making my own money. I had my own car. I had female friends. I was living the life, but thanks to him, I went back to school, and I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad I did. So Shakespeare said, youth is wasted on the young. So I don't know if it was Shakespeare, but somebody said that. So my father knew that, you need some degrees. So I got that. The fire, integration, some people say it was deliberately set. Some people say it wasn't. It doesn't matter. The school was already going to integrate. As I said, integration passed, or not passed, but it was outlawed in 1954. So it's just a function of time. But at least in Georgetown, it was smoother than a lot of other places. That's a really good question. Let me give it some thought. I would say, I can't pinpoint it to one day specifically, otherwise it might have been my graduation. But I think one of the happiest, or the times I enjoyed it the most, is when I was in Miss Peterson's class. It was the last class of the day. She was kind of very, I'm not going to say very sociable, but just easy on a teenager. She was white, but everybody loved her, white, black, and every other hue. Miss Peterson, I don't even remember her first name. She was kind, she was considerate, she was compassionate, and she was fun. You see, I was an educator for many years and a school administrator. We have to relate to kids where they are. You can history down their throat and all of that, but she would make it relative. She would laugh, she would have fun with us, And I basically was a good kid. I wasn't trying to get over. Some people, they take kindness for weakness. I wasn't. I learned from her, and I really enjoyed her. I did. Yes. One, on the negative side. I won't call her name, I won't nominate her, but I remember one day I was sitting in her class on the second floor at Winyah, and at that time I may have been in the 10th grade, and we were taking U.S. history. And I remember her saying, she had a real soft voice, she was older, she was white. She said, class, we were talking about slavery. Nowadays we call it enslavement. No one's born a slave. You have to be enslaved. She said, class, I want you to close your book. And so we all closed our big textbooks. She took off her glasses. Again, she was very soft-spoken. And she said, now I want to tell you something. I know what the book says, but I'm telling you that the relationship between the slave and the slave owner was just like family. They did a lot together. They took care of each other, and on and on and on. And even then, at 15 or 16, I'm saying, I don't believe this woman is saying this. But I was trained, I was raised not to be disrespectful. I told my dad about it. And my mother may have still been living there. But I never will forget that. It's similar to what was recently said about slaves down in Texas, no, Florida, benefiting from skills. Oh, that's a rare form of stupidity, excuse me. Talk about white supremacy. So I never forgot that. And she was not mean-spirited to me. In fact, she gave me some of my best grades. Or should I say I gave myself some of my best grades. But there were other teachers. Mr. Schubert was one. Coach Allen happens to be white, but I liked him. He very down to earth. I think there was a few other teachers that, and then the staff, the ladies in the lunchroom. We were all, a regular high school. There was a semblance of unity. There was fun. We got along. There wasn't, I don't remember one racial fight. We didn't hang out in the same circles. When we went to a pep rally or a game, we didn't sit together, but they don't do that now. So it wasn't just about race. Yeah. Well, I didn't have a date until I got to the prom. And again, I didn't want to go, but they found a young lady who we're best of friends now. But they found a young lady that finally agreed to go with me. And we went to the prom, and afterwards we went to a little club called the Yum Young Club, which was about 3 blocks from the school. And it was owned by one of my cousins, Sam Barnes, legendary figure here in Georgetown. And again, that song, Just My Imagination, we listened to music. We had some fun. At that time, I had started drinking wine, so we had some wine. We had a good time, and then we took our dates home, and that was it. I didn't have a lot of money, even though my parents had given me money. Dressed up in the tux and, looking good, feeling good, and smelling good. So we had a good time. But, again, I was pretty shy, and I wasn't going to do anything to get me in trouble, So I didn't really have a girlfriend. Now, my brother did. But I was still grieving over my mother. So I wasn't interested really in all of that social stuff. Yeah. We did go to a beach a few times. I have to tell you that I never learned to swim. So all I could do is put my feet in the water. But I enjoyed that. And then if I went with friends, that was what it was about. Just getting out of the house, going to the beach, going to see a movie, going bowling, just hanging out, as young people do. But I do know there was a very tragic incident that happened with 3 of my friends, Stephen Ward, and I forget the other brothers, that drowned at Huntington Beach. And they couldn't find the body for a while, so I just knew I wasn't getting in the water, Now, I had a cousin who just passed. You probably knew her, Miss Lucille Josie, and she really took me and my brother all over the place. She would come Saturday, let's go to Charleston. She had to do some shopping, and she was the one that helped me see Georgetown and all of the surrounding areas, because my dad didn't drive, and neither did my mom. So just her taking us to a lot of places, I saw how it was here, because I wasn't from here. And I thank God for her. She just passed maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But she really went out of her way. We took her car to the prom. She was just that kind of person. Yeah. Well, we would go down to the Rec, which is down at the Bay. We would go to, at that time, what's that place near Hopcott Barony? It's a gated community now. Debbie Do, yeah. We would go there. At that time, you could take your significant other there, I wouldn't do it now, and I'm scared of the dark. But, that's some of the place we would go. There weren't a lot of places that at least my brother and I went. Other people who had a car, see, that's a good thing about the South. Up north, you didn't get a license at 15. In fact, I was blown away when I saw 15-year-olds driving school buses. You had to be a little older to get a license in New York. So with a license, that opens up a lot more activities for you. But because I didn't have one, now, and I did eventually get one, and my brother got one too, but we didn't have a car. So I'm sure my peers, my classmates, went a lot more places than we did. Keep in mind, me personally, I wasn't very social. So I didn't care. If you fed me and turned the ball game on, I was satisfied. But oh, Jesus, all that changed once I got out of school. I just sold as much oats as I could sow. But back then, I was not living under my parents' roof. So, plus, I always work. There's a lot of people that have fun, but they don't want to go to work. You can do both. Yeah. It was okay. I'm not going to say it was hideous or bad. It was okay. It wasn't great, but teenagers are not looking for home cooked meals unless they are at home. They want French fries and pizza and all of that. We had that occasionally, but not very often. We had traditional sandwiches and whatnot, and either you ate it or you didn't. I ate mine. Okay. It was okay. And every now and then, if you were nice and you knew somebody in the kitchen, they might put a little more on your plate, you know. Um, the trick is, and I learned this a long time, well, many years after when I became a teacher, if you feed students too much, that second half of the day, they get something I call the itis. And like, yeah, so, you ate too much. And then I was one of those person I couldn't wait to get home because we lived so close. Now, that's the good thing about it because a lot of people had to take the bus. Sometimes it was more than an hour before they got home. Well, when you get out of school and that bell rang, I'm telling you, 10 minutes later, 5 minutes later, I'm home. And I had plenty of food. I was blessed. We were blessed. Yeah. Winyah was an interesting experience, a very warm experience. It wasn't, I don't remember anything negative, to be honest with you, other than the comment about slave owners treated their slaves as family. I thought that was ludicrous even then. But other than that, didn't have a lot of problems. I remember one of my coaches, again, I'm not going to nominate him. He was also one of the football coaches, do the research. But oh, I'm sorry. Well, all right, I'll tell you both. He said to me, he called me Williams. Williams, you're kind of tall and lanky. I was a skinny kid. I think you'd be a good poll voter. You guys know what poll voting is, right?
Yes.
And I almost cursed. I ain't getting off the ground. If you think you're going to get me 20 feet up there, I don't think so. But he asked, he tried it, but that dog didn't hunt. Now, brothers don't pole vault. They do now, but back then, no, we weren't into that. But I will say this. I won't tell you the coach of the team. But when my mother passed, I was distraught. I was mortified. It was unexpected. Like any child, I really loved my parents, my mother. So, in the middle of the baseball season, almost in the beginning of the season, I had to take a leave of absence because I was severely grieving. And I think I was gone at least 3 weeks, maybe a month. When I got back to the team, now, I was never a starter, but if you know anything about sports, if the game gets out of hand, they start emptying the bench. If you get a ball game, baseball is 9 innings. I'm not sure when in high school how many innings they play, but if you get a score something like 12-1, and you got 2 or 3 more innings, you give other kids an opportunity to play. Keep in mind, the year before, they had won it all, the team. Keep in mind, I'm the only black on the team. But I wasn't an affirmative action. I had skills with the best of them. But because I had lost my mother and I was grieving, I was out for at least 3 weeks, maybe a month. Well, one of the games, It was an away game. I wasn't sure whether it was in Goose Creek or Hannah, all those other places. I said, Coach, I said, well, why didn't you put me in the game? Because it was a runaway, it was a romp. And he looked me dead in the eye. He says, well, Steve, you haven't been here. So I said to him, I said, well, you know why I haven't been here? I lost my mother. And he looked at me as if to say, oh, well. I was wounded. And I went home and I told my dad. And he was grabbing his hat, coat and hat, and I'm gonna go take care of this. I said, no, Daddy. Because he knew how much I loved baseball. And it was the only sport that I really excelled in. He said, no. I said, no, Daddy, I'm gonna quit the team, just leave it alone. I've never been a quitter in my life. I don't teach my kids to be quitters. But that was an uncalled for comment, especially when the game was well out of hand. And he couldn't, I played the outfield. He could have put me there, and if I personally gave up 5 runs, the game was still already won. So when he said that, I thought that was not only mean-spirited, but I thought it was racist. Only black kid on the team, opportunity to get me in the game, and I hadn't had many opportunities. So I'm not one to manufacture and just flip the race card out. Here we are 50-something years later, I thought then and I still do. That's why I won't tell you his name. Okay? No, I just wanted to add this. I didn't know at the time, and I really learned perhaps over the last 5, 10 years, the glory of Howard. I knew it was a colored school, a so-called colored school. I knew it was a great school. I knew there was severe learning going on. I knew there were legends and giants. Howard have students all over the world that went there, mostly because of Professor Beck. He was a no-nonsense person. But I did not know the true origin of Howard. Most people think because it's named after General Oliver Otis Howard, the Freedmen's Bureau and the founder of Howard University, but that was his name only, and there were literally scores, maybe hundreds of schools named after him. But the original founders of Howard were 9 blacks, including the minister at Bethel and one of the first preachers at Bethesda. I wrote a book about it. It's called The Lost History of Howard. And people have to understand that there were free blacks with skills that were brought over from Africa. It wasn't anything they're saying now, they learned it here. No, they brought it over. It's craftsmanship, carpentry, blacksmith. You know, how could you be on the planet for thousands of years, even before there was a Europe, and not know anything? So I'm saying that Howard, right, even before the war was over in 1863, those free blacks, the minister who, probably even where we are now, Augustus T. Carr, C-A-R-R, ran a very, not famous, but a very functioning horse stable, a stable. During the war, the Confederate Army took over it, all the animals, all of that. Instead of lamenting over it and saying, well, what am I going to do now? He became the first, he started Bethel, okay? And he got together with the minister over at Bethesda and 7 other blacks, many of whom were carpenters. And they pooled their money together. And they asked the entire community, even sympathetic whites, we need a school. We want a school. Same thing Harriet Tubman did for James Bowley. We have to be educated. And that's how Howard started. But they ran out of money, and they just, several years later, and they had to go and ask someone with the Freedmen's Bureau to help them. The Freedmen's Bureau said, yeah, we'll help you, but we want it renamed. But it was first called the Colored Academy. I didn't know this 10 years ago. In fact, I don't even know if my dad knew it, okay? So we love Howard. I didn't go to Howard, but I love Howard. My ancestors, my relatives went to Howard. But I want people to know that Howard was an idea born by free blacks and others. And they just didn't come up with the idea. They put the carpentry skills, and they literally built the first school. Then they got together with James Boley, who was the school commissioner, and worked out a deal with getting teachers. Okay, so there's a lot of untold stories about our community where we helped pull ourselves up by our bootstrap. I've done many documentaries about all of the black businesses on Front Street. People have to understand that 9 out of 10 people who lived here were enslaved people. And so after the war, it was still 90%. And if you wanted anything, you had to bake it, build it, cook it, do it yourself. There was no Walmart or Amazon, so you had to do it yourself. Well, we had the skills to do it and the knowledge.